let me introduce Dr. Derfler. Dr. Derfler was here last year, talked to us about Masada. This year he's going to talk about excavating the Byzantine Church at Tel Kerioth. I know everyone knows, but anyhow. I'll let him explain to you, that's what his presentation is all about. It really looks great. I saw the presentation earlier. It's another good one. A little bit about Dr. Derfler. He's an international educational consultant. He's a public speaker, an archaeologist, a historian, a researcher, teacher, and a writer. Dr. Derfler has been uncovering the histories of ancient civilizations for over 40 years, tracing the development of Western religions from their roots in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean countries. Dr. Derfler brings insight to current political and social events, bridging the past with the future to promote greater understanding between the people from different faiths and walks of life. Dr. Derfler.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back here. Smitty neglected to say one thing, though, that he bribed me. I took him to Israel, I took him to Morocco, and I brought him back. He bribed me. The rest of you didn't bribe me enough to leave him there. But as a commercial announcement, there is the distinct possibility that sometime within the next year or so, I'll get the chance to leave Smitty in Egypt and any of the rest of you. Tragically speaking, Egypt is a lot safer than a number of destinations in the United States these days. And as a result, after a hiatus of about 5.5 years, we've all deemed it probable that it's a destination of excitement and adventure and the chance to return now in 2018. So that's a commercial announcement, and we'll keep you informed here at Timesifters. To travel to the ancient land of David and Solomon, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Leah, and Rachel, the ministry of Jesus, and the monarchy of King Herod. And the third holiest place in Islam is to be profoundly touched by history. But the archaeology of this region is so much more than just the archaeology in a narrow strip of land that's 360 miles long and 50 miles wide at its widest point, going from the Med over to the Dead. And we're talking about seas now. Because in order to be an archaeologist and to understand the history, the architecture, the art, the society, the culture, you need to expand your horizons to go all the way along the northeastern corner of Africa and Egypt, all the way into Asia Minor, and where's Mickey? The Hittites, the Hurrians, the Hyksos, and then into the Tigris and the Euphrates valleys. But then you also need to jump across the Mediterranean into the Aegean, to Greece and Rome as well, because all of these cultures and societies interacted with this land bridge known geographically as Syria-Palestine. And because of that, you need to familiarize yourself as a professional with all of these other cultures and all of the archaeology, because it is so intertwined and interlaced that it's enough to give you a headache. I've been involved in 7 major excavation projects in Israel, 2 of them as the American director. And the last one, before I kind of retired from the field, was serving as the American director of the excavation of a Byzantine church in the Negev desert of Israel at a place called, Smitty, remember this, Tel Kerioth. He didn't butcher it too badly. And It's with pleasure that I talk to you about the excavation process and about what we came up with. So it is an interaction between ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Anatolia, and then the Arab conquest of the land in the early 7th and 8th centuries of this era as well. The site of Tel Kerioth. I took this picture over here from a very tall ladder, okay? The site of Tel Kerioth is located at the foot of Mount Amassa, Har Amassa, of the Judean Hill country, the southernmost tip of the Judean Hills, which are the backbone of ancient Israel. This site then overlooks a basin that we call the Arad Basin. It is an extraordinarily large, high plateau land that's relatively flat. People have been living in the Arad Basin for at least 6,500 years. And Tel Kerioth is just another extension, historically, of that occupation. Kriyot itself is 10 kilometers north of the ancient citadel fortress of Tel Arad, and 18 kilometers as the crow flies from the modern city of Arad. We spent 4 seasons excavating the Byzantine Church and surveying its environs. Here in Sarasota and in Southwest Florida, you see sometimes signs that say Panther Crossing, right? Well, in Israel, you have got camel crossings, because how else are you going to find a camel in a camelot, right? All right, Smitty, remind me not to use that one again. All right. Educational Resources, Inc., which is my nonprofit educational consultancy, in conjunction with Hamline University, where I was teaching at that time, the Arad Archaeology Center as well, and the Antiquities Authority of Israel, all were co-sponsors of this 4-year project. Arad itself is a small town in eastern Negev desert of Israel. It was founded in 1962. Today there are 30,000 people there and only 1 traffic light and only 1 roundabout, which is even more important. And they're not planning on building any more. So maybe we can learn something from them? I don't know. Okay. The town of Arad is a lovely desert town in the high plateau land of the eastern Negev. It is very hot, but it's very dry. Remember, they say it's not the heat, but it's the humidity. And there isn't any in Arad. So people from all over the world come here to cure any kind of respiratory ailments like asthma and things like that. It's a lovely community, the entrance to the town with these beautiful concrete sculptures and birds that you can see on the top, on the upper left. Then you move to one of the major English and Hebrew language programs in Israel called the World Union of Jewish Studies, founded in Arad. The Arad Observation Point, where on a clear day, yes, you can see the Dead Sea from Arad, with this beautiful concrete sculpture by Israel Tamarkin, the artist, and then the town center of Arad in the lower left. When I started work in archaeology way back in the last millennium, I love saying that, you know, because we would sleep in portable, movable structures, okay, tents, if you want to call them that. And rocks to the left were for the boys, rocks to the right were for the girls, and there was a very rudimentary excavation base camp. We found out very quickly, though, once we got to laying the groundwork for our Tel Kerioth excavation, that for only $5 a person a day, including food, we could have the volunteers stay in a small hotel with air conditioning and a swimming pool. And that included transportation out to the site, so we opted for that. So this excavation gave a sense of luxuriousness to the students and the volunteers. And by the way, there's nobody in this room that couldn't have been a volunteer on our project. So if we ever go back into the field, this may be something you might want to consider. And there you can see that lovely swimming pool. But we made sure that they showered first before going into the pool because it would have been filled with sand, right? Okay. Surface survey work was carried out in this part of the Negev desert by the Israeli Antiquities Authority and the Arad Archaeology Center under the direction of Yehuda Guvrin, my colleague and my co-director. He was the Israeli director, I was the American one. And we discovered that in a surface survey in archaeology, everything that looks like it belongs to human occupation you pick up and you examine. Because in archaeology, there's this unwritten rule that everything old works its way to the surface and everything new finds its way into the ground. So we found that based on the surface survey that we carried out, excavation materials beneath the surface probably dated from the Herodian period of the 1st century BCE, 1st century CE, all the way through the early Arab occupation of the 8th and 10th centuries of this era as well. So we knew that there was a wealth of material spanning over a millennium just waiting for us to begin to excavate. And this is then what we did. We found the outline almost exactly on the surface of a major structure, a public building that would turn out to be a Byzantine church, which we'll be getting to in a second. And all of the ceramic material, a few coins that were found as well, seem to indicate that the church itself was built in the 4th century after an earthquake that ravaged the biblical world in the year 363 of this era. Many other churches were either built anew or rebuilt and restored after this major earthquake that ran through the Jordan Valley, shaking everything up all the way to the Mediterranean Sea to the west and all the way past the modern capital of Amman, Jordan, to the east. The name Tel Kerioth is a name that then follows everything that we know about ancient languages and how ancient place names cling to their roots in spite of linguistic and cultural changes from one occupier of a land to the next, to the next, to the next. In Arabic, the site is called Khirbet el Karyatin. In Hebrew, we knew the site as Tel Kerioth. And if we take into account the biblical narrative about the ministry of Jesus and a series of Jesus's disciples, one of them, you're familiar, sort of gets a bad rap. His name, though, because remember, they were all Jews, they were all speaking Aramaic, his name was, in Aramaic and in Hebrew, Yehuda ish Kriyot, Judah, the man from Kriyot. We know him today as Judas Iscariotes, Judah Iscariot. We believe that this was the hometown of one of the disciples of Jesus, Judas, because the name of the community through its Arab occupation and transliteration into Arabic language is the same, even to modern Hebrew today. The site was identified as early as 1918 by early pilgrims and scholars as well. So we have a 100-year recollection in modern history of this ancient site. The community itself covered over 200 acres, but we only could focus on the Byzantine Church during our 4 years of excavation. The community itself lived in a combination of private houses built above ground and in a series of caverns that were part of the landscape in the vicinity. And here you can see on the left some of those caves that then had signs of human occupation dated as late as the 10th and early 11th centuries of this era. You're in the eastern Negev desert. So where do you get water? The eastern Negev gets an incredible amount of rainfall, maybe the third week in January. All right. It gets about 11 inches of rainfall in January and February, and that's about it. The Arad Basin that we are situated in fills and forms something called Lake Arad, which lasts for maybe 3 weeks. And then the water either evaporates or eventually soaks into the ground. Any communities in the eastern Negev then would rock-cut cistern themselves into survival for the rest of the year. And here we can see in the limestone bedrock a series of bell-shaped cisterns were cut. These cisterns then would be first of all, they would be plastered to make them waterproof, and then they would be hand-filled that would allow the community to survive with enough water to last them until the next rainy season. And that's what you see here. You can see the beautifully cut ashlar blocks of limestone that formed the wellheads here and here. Now, I know that there are a couple of people in this audience that have been on group travel with me to Morocco, to Israel, to other places. And I say, well, we're going to get moving around 8 in the morning. Go, what, are you crazy? It's a good thing they weren't part of the excavations. Because anytime that you're digging in North Africa or the Middle East, especially during the summer months, you get up around 4:30 in the morning because you want to get out to the site by sunrise so that you can get in a full 8-hour day before you quit between 1 and 2 in the afternoon when it is too prohibitively hot. So you got to get up early to be part of the excavations. Sometimes in the Arad Basin, a fog would form in the lowest level of the basin, but that would burn off by about 8 or 9 o'clock, so you could actually see what you were doing. They don't look really happy. Well, this guy looks really happy. I don't know why. I don't think he went to bed that night, and he just stayed up all night. After digging for about 3 hours, our breakfast, time-wise, is actually about our lunch, because we've already got half of a day of excavation in place. And we would take our lunch out with us, set up this tent that you see in the lower right, build a fire, brew some Turkish coffee, and have a good morning. By 1 o'clock or so, we're finished for the day and we go back into town. When we get back to the home base, after a quick shower and lunch by around 2 o'clock or so, it's siesta time, because everything in the Middle East and North Africa pretty much shuts down in the afternoon, except for tourists, okay? But we certainly aren't tourists on this program. Then just before dinner, we do something that we call reading the pottery. In other words, we dip and rinse the ceramic potsherds that have been excavated in the different squares or different rooms during the day. And reading them means that we understand what kind of vessels they were, what kind of shapes, perhaps what kind of date, and ascertaining whether we can put them all in a baggie and send them to our ceramic restorer back at the university. After dinner, the students would just hang out or go to bed really early. Those of us on the staff would then have to do the mountains of paperwork, which today is done on a laptop. It's a lot easier, let me tell you. Daily journals, daily floor plans, area plans, basket lists, all of these things would have to be filled out. In other words, you get a very clear reading of a day-to-day excavation, even months later, if you look at all of the journals and notebooks that have been meticulously kept by the archaeologists on site. In 1994, we completed the excavation of this beautiful basilical-style church. It was 27 by 16 meters in size. Initially, in the first season, when we started to excavate, if you have no idea where anything is below the ground, you need to have a semblance of sanity to your excavation methodology. And that sanity is the creation of an artificial grid system. And because we're in that half of the world, we work in 5 by 5 meter squares. And we leave a half-meter wide section, so we're actually digging 4.5 by 4.5, section called a balk, B-A-L-K, to separate the squares, and everything that you dig up in those squares is kept separate. But the people in antiquity didn't live in artificial sections, in artificial squares that are 5 by 5 meters on a perfect north, south, east, west axis. So the minute you start to come upon walls and floors, you remove the artificial sections so that you can excavate the room as a complete feature. For example, this room would probably have had 6 artificial squares when you first started to dig here, before you found out that there was no wall interiorly until you got to the exterior perimeter walls. Do you follow me? Okay. And we began to get only a half a meter down. We're talking about 18, 19 inches or so. And guess what? We began to hit a stunning mosaic floor. That's what I did when we first found it. These mosaic floors told us so much about the building and about its history that we'll be getting to in just a moment. The building itself then turning out to be a beautiful basilical style church, had an apse where the altar area was held. It had 2 rooms that we called pastaphoria, which were rooms, storage rooms for the vestments, the ritual objects used by the clergy. There were 2 long side aisles separated from the central aisle by a colonnaded row on each side that supported the roof. There was an outer courtyard that was probably roofed over as well, not a courtyard, but a nave. And then there was an outer courtyard in front where there was a cistern or a well. A stunningly beautiful structure, and here it was, 1,500 years after it was first built, just a couple of feet below the ground. We're going to go from the outside of the building inside. The courtyard measured about 10 by 13 meters. It was unroofed, and the floor consisted of very large paving stones, as you can see right here. In the center was a large bell-shaped cistern that was plastered over so that it was waterproof. There was a small, and there's the cistern right there. There was a small portico or roofed over stepped entrance into the central portion of the church, the nave, and there was only one entrance in the front wall. The entrance to the courtyard of the church was on the south wall, as you see right here. The building only enjoyed an existence of 4 centuries, because in the year 787 or 747/8 or so, another earthquake devastated the Jordan Valley. And this time, the Byzantine Church of Tel Kerioth fell out of existence because it was leveled. The building has all of the elements associated with an earthquake type of destruction. And we will see that in just a moment as well. Here we can see in the courtyard the excavation of the cistern. And you can see it was beautifully stone constructed. There were bits and pieces of plaster still adhering to the surface of the interior walls. We only excavated half of the cistern, 2.9 meters, which is close to 10 feet in depth, because, frankly, we knew what the outline of it was, and it was can I say in archaeology a waste of time? But it was a waste of resources, of our physical resources of our team. So by cutting a section through it and excavating half of it, we got all of the information that was necessary. It was filled with rainwater, and we can still see the remnants here and here of the drain that ran from the tiled roof of the church that then funneled all of the rainwater off of the tiled roof into this cistern. And here's the evidence right here and right here. Some of the covering stones were still intact. In the courtyard itself, and just outside of the main complex, a couple of small fired brick clay ovens called tanurs were discovered. These are beehive-shaped ovens with a flue hole and a vent, a flue hole at the base, and then the vent in the center at the top, as you can see right here. By the way, that stick right there is a 20-centimeter stick. Each color is 10 centimeters, which is just about 6 or so inches. And the number plate for our official photographic purposes gives you the date, which would be what, the 29th month and the 7th day? No, they do things backward in Europe, right? It's July 29th. The direction of the photograph is west, and this is locus or room number 147, where this oven was found. This particular oven dated to the 9th and 10th centuries because it was early Arabic pottery that was found in and around it. So this is after the destruction of the church, with the Arabic occupation following the destruction of the church. This is the threshold into the courtyard of the church itself. And it was 2 steps down from the surrounding territory. There you can see the beautiful steps leading down to the stone paved surface. The foundations of the church were the only walls that were beautifully carved ashlar blocks. The upper walls were of unhewn field stones that were plastered over. And here you can see the beautifully carved ashlar blocks that formed the front wall of the church. In the debris scattered adjacent to the front wall were a number of beautifully carved blocks, architectural elements, showing you the equal-sided Byzantine cross right here. This was one of the column capitals of that small portico or entry into the church itself. Evidence of the earthquake shows you that it wasn't a random destruction. But you know, when an earthquake strikes and the shock waves ripple out from the epicenter, things will fall in one direction. All of the columns and the church itself all seems to have fallen to the west-southwest. And here you can see evidence of the columns that supported the roof of this entrance portico, all fallen in one direction. These were monolithic stone columns, 10 meters long, 30 feet long, one single block of limestone. That's incredible. And there you can see them as we initially discovered them in the debris, and then after they were cleared, fallen off of this small podium that formed the entrance into the church proper. Adjacent to the front wall, a number of small Byzantine-style oil lamps, such as this one. Don't worry, I didn't steal it from the excavator. Such as this one then, which dates to the 6th, 7th century of this era, were found in the debris. And if I hold it up like this, we found it upside down, as you can see in the upper picture. And then this is that oil lamp. And you can take a look at this afterwards. This is what helps us to date the occupation of the church, because pottery is like calligraphy. Handwriting styles and alphabetic styles change one generation to the next, one century to the next. The same thing with ceramics, especially with oil lamps, as you will see in another moment or so. Here now, in the lower picture, you can look down the axis of the church, and you can see the outer courtyard. You can see right here then that podium that enters into the nave, and then the three-aisled basilica and the apse in the background. This picture was taken during our final season because what we did was then we put down an enormous tarpaulin, and then we covered it over with 3 feet of sand because we wanted to preserve the mosaic floors that you'll see in just a minute, because we didn't have the funding available from the government to build a fence around the church or to have guards, paid guards, out in the middle of the desert. So we were afraid of vandalism, and therefore we buried the mosaic floors. That's what you see here, but there you can see the church in its pristine, cleaned state after excavations. The front of the church, the narthex, was divided up 2/3 and 1/3. We had 2/3 of the narthex, part of it opposite the main entrance into the church, and then there was a small partition wall separating a smaller room to the southwest that then had a beautiful baptismal font built into the outside wall. This is where one of the most exciting things of the excavation, one of the most of a series of most exciting things. Isn't that always the way it is in archaeology? You find something that's exciting, and then you find something else and it's even more exciting, and then you find something else and it's even more exciting until you don't find something else and it's still exciting. We discovered a stone-built crypt that ran beneath the floor of the narthex of the church. The floor of this room was of beautiful, white, clunky mosaic tiles. And sunk into the floor level, now broken in two, was an 800-pound limestone slab that was the covering stone for the seal stone for a tomb that was beneath the floor of the narthex. We removed the two portions of the stone. And the entrance was so small, we're talking about 2 feet wide and 4 feet long, that my daughter, who's now 33, and the son of my Israeli counterpart, who also is 33, no, they didn't hook up, were practically the only two who could get into the tomb itself to do excavation. But don't worry, even though she was only 9 years old, she was a veteran. It was already her 2nd year of digging. Go figure. Do you remember that nursery rhyme when you stuck in your thumb and you pulled out a skull? This almost took her out of the world of archaeology because they were clearing the dirt in the tomb and they were using their hands to sort of sift the dirt into the bucket, and her hand went in, and the skull of one of the skeletons in there was so friable that she stuck her finger right through. I didn't know 9-year-olds could fly, but she flew right out of that tomb, and she still doesn't forgive me for that. But inside, 1.2 meters deep, which is about 4 feet, and filled up to about 3 feet with dirt and sand and debris, we discovered 2 skeletons. There you can see the 2 skulls. Here you can see some of the bones. Once we had analyzed the skeletons that we had removed, they were reburied adjacent to the Byzantine Church out at the site of Tel Kerioth. So they're not at the Israeli Antiquities laboratories. The two, we believe that they were monks who were buried beneath the floor in the crypt of this church, are now buried adjacent to the church, still resting there after 1,500 years. This then is the interior of the church as well. Excuse me, of the tomb. Inside the tomb, along with the two skeletons, we found dozens of bottles and bottle fragments of Byzantine glass, as you see in the upper left. We found 5 Byzantine oil lamps with pseudo-Greek inscriptions on them. And we also found 150 various beads. And you can come and take a look at some of these beads: glass, stone, faience, carnelian, and one small bronze pendant as well that were found inside this tomb. Here you can see some of those beads, and here you can see 2 views of that one bronze pendant. And again, that's 6 through 10 centimeters, so that's a 5 centimeter long stick right there. The other room of the narthex, built into the wall, was a baptismal font. This was used, obviously, for religious purposes. But then what was amazing was found on the floor of this chamber adjacent to the baptismal font. A beautiful Greek inscription was set into the mosaics on the floor of this room. And it basically says, Kyrie eleison, Ianus, Yorio, Adelphu, Amin. And KE is the abbreviation for Kyrie eleison, God have mercy, John, Giorgio, brothers, Amen. I can't tell you how excited I was, because I told my students that now if we dig on the other side of the narthex, we'll find Paul and Ringo. But you know what? They were monks, not Beatles. But there's that Greek inscription. Kyrie eleison, Ianu, Giorgio, Adelphu, Amin. 2 of the monks who played a major role and were considered to be so pious and played such a major role in the history of their basilica that it was deemed kosher. Can I mix metaphors? To be buried in a crypt beneath the floor of the church. This is identical to the Byzantine churches that you find, for example, at Avdat, where you find the same kind of tombstones as well. A doorway from this room led into the southernmost aisle. It was beautifully plastered, and there were 2 octagonal marble colonnette bases. We don't believe that these were structural columns, but rather these were small decorative colonnettes that flanked the doorway. And what is really way cool about this is that you usually don't see so well preserved the fact that you have a doorway and the door was entirely filled up in antiquity because of the earthquake activity, and the plaster is still preserved, was still preserved around the corner of the door jamb. Do you follow me? Through the thickness of the door. And there you can see all of it. And we cleared out this debris very carefully, got one photograph, and then the whole thing collapsed. But that's what happens in archaeology. The southernmost aisle was also a beautiful carpet of white, clunky, plain mosaic tiles, except for one small area. You know, in the ancient world, Persian rugs cost a fortune. I guess that's in the modern world too. So what did they do? Instead of having Persian rugs, they had Persian mosaic tile rugs on their floors. And we found one beautiful panel of a mosaic carpet inlaid into the floor of the southern aisle. Here you can see it. Now here you can see the kind of debris that we had to remove from the earthquake that sealed this entire building. Don't worry, we finally got around to this stuff. You can see it was red and white mosaic tile set into the floor. And here you can see then it's such a really cool optical illusion, because depending on where your eyes are focusing, you see a circle with geometric lozenges and a circle in the middle, or you see the lozenges that make the Byzantine cross, depending on where your eyes are focusing, the optical illusion. It was a stunningly beautiful floor that measured 2.25 by 3.2 meters in size, which is roughly 7 by 11 feet or so. Each of these aisles then, the side aisles, had their own doorways, and there was a doorway into the central aisle of the basilica as well. Here you can see a beautifully carved threshold, and found in the threshold as well, we found the door socket. But this was no ordinary stone door socket, because it was a bronze inlaid door socket. In other words, a bronze cup had been beautifully forged to be set into the stone door socket to allow for the pivoting of the door. And there you can barely make it out right there. This stuff is so cool. You don't expect something like that. The northern aisle had beautifully preserved walls to a height of about 3.5 feet. They were all of unhewn field stones, but then again, as I said, they were plastered over. And the plaster, the limestone plaster that adhered to the face of these walls, was a herringbone style of incised plaster decoration on some of the walls. In other words, like the bones of a fish, herringbone. Other portions of walls in other rooms were beautifully painted red fresco work. And so we have two different styles of plaster decoration adhering to the walls of this church. Below was found one of those colonnettes. Remember I said the decorative column, not a structural column, outside of the door of one of those aisles. And here you can see a better example then, a close-up of that herringbone style of incised white limestone plaster work that adorned the surfaces of all the interior walls of this church. I would have hated to be inside that church in 747 or 748 when the earthquake struck, because all of the columns toppled in one direction. The arch of this particular colonnaded wall between these two column bases actually fell straight down. So you could still see the arch, the beautifully cut blocks of stone, and the keystone in the center of that arch. But the entire church lay in ruins, and there were thousands and thousands of ceramic roof tiles scattered about the whole area of the church. Now I know that probably some of you suffered damage to your tile roofs during our little brush with fame and the hurricane. I've got some ceramic tiles that you can reuse if you want to. But it's just like the kind of roof tiles that we don't use today. They used flat roof tiles that were interlocking to prevent water from dripping in, not the barrel vaulted roof tiles that we're familiar with. And here you can see then, and you can come up and see that the two fragments of the roof tiles as they would interlock together to form not an airtight, but a watertight seal on the roof of this church. Isn't it fun to bring toys? It is. And there you can see some of those roof tiles. Okay, that's staged. okay? We didn't find them like that. At the entrance to the church then, as we began to reach the floor level, the most stunning field of mosaics appeared to us. Right inside the main entrance to the central aisle was a dedicatory inscription. It was a black tabula ansata inscribed in Greek with Greek black tiles inlaid in a white limestone backing, measuring about 2 meters by 2/3 of a meter in size. And it said, Kyrie phylexontes, karpsophoros, tastu oikomenos. God have mercy, guard the fruits of your household. And this was confusing as hell to us. What does it mean, guard the fruits of your household? Well, as we then began to clear into the main central aisle of the basilica, it became very clear to us. This was one of the most stunning fields of mosaic work, well within early Christian iconography that you can ever possibly imagine. There was a beautiful 3-foot wide perimeter border that ran around the interior of the central aisle. It had the wave motif and an interlocking Grecian key motif. And then on both sides, this surrounded a series of medallions made out of acanthus leaves. And inside the medallions, as we will see in just a moment, were not only the 7 varieties of fruits and vegetables that you find mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, but other fruits and vegetables as well. Therefore, God, guard the fruits of your household, talking about the beautiful mosaic floor. And then from this border that surrounded it, 3 feet wide all the way around, we began to clear a beautiful mosaic amphora. And from that amphora grew grapevines. Those grapevines then formed 55 or so medallions that surrounded beautiful iconographic images on this mosaic floor. And we're going to see these now. Here then, you can see the dedicatory inscription, part of it broken right here. You can see the wave motif on both sides and the acanthus leaves then that surrounded fruits and vegetables. Then once you get inside the main field, you have got that amphora of which the grapevines then emanate from, forming those medallions. The grapevines then all come together at the far end of the central aisle of the basilica. Now, I know that that's sideways, but that's because I wanted to show you how they were on the floor. You've got bowls of fruit. You see that? I wouldn't mind having that on a dining room table, right? Okay. Here you can see the medallions as they're being formed. These 2 volunteers then, these students, are then doing a rubbing, a chalk rubbing of the amphora for our records. Here you can see baskets of fruit. A tisket, a tasket, I think that those are Bing cherries, I'm not sure. You have got peppers, because remember, what's the hottest part of a pepper? The seeds? They made sure that you knew that you were getting hot chili peppers here. You have got dates. An artichoke, of all things. And you've got 2 different medallions that then have artichokes inside the acanthus leaves forming the medallions. A plant and a fruit, or a fruit, called a sabra. This is what native Israelis are called today, because this is a prickly pear. They're tough on the outside, but they're nice and soft and sweet and tender on the inside. But you can't grab them right off of the plant because you'll get about 8 million little thorns stuck into your hand. And the way that the Israelis do it, they have really thick industrial type rubber gloves, so they don't get stuck. Here you've got melons. Here you've got sheaves of wheat. And here you have got one of the artists from the Antiquities Authority's main headquarters at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, who came down then to do all of these plans meticulously. But you notice, she would discover in the innermost medallions and on the corners, it appears empty. I'll get to that in just a second. Here you can see then that central amphora, and flanking that central amphora are blank spaces. These are the size and scale of the mosaic tiles of the original floor. You notice they're all about 2 by 2 by 2 in terms of centimeters in size. Extraordinarily detailed work. But then, in the blank spaces, we see no imagery whatsoever, and the tiles are all these more enormous white clumpy tiles. Here's what we believe. The 8th century was a period of tremendous disputation with very little dialogue between members of the Christian community, the Eastern and the Western churches, and by members of the Arabic Islamic community. There were a series of iconoclastic wars that were going on, especially during the rule of Pope Leo II, around 721 or so, give or take a week or 10 days. Pope Leo II was arguing with the church about what iconography meant. Was it iconography or was it idolatry? The church still wrestles with that, right? In the Catholic Church, is the cross and the crucifixion on the wall, could that be considered idolatrous? Because some people pray to it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or is it iconographic? In other words, it is a symbol that you pray through to God, not to. But then on the other hand, you have a caliph by the name of Yazid II. And please don't mix him up with Yazid I, okay? Yazid II said that as long as there is nothing that is offensive to Islam, we will allow you to worship in your churches. And what is offensive in Islam are graven images. And therefore, we don't know what happened in 721. Was it Yazid or was it Leo II? But there was an iconographic battle that raged, and at some point in time, the imagery of humans, of animals, was removed from this church floor. But when they chiseled it out, that meant that there were all of these little potholes. You remember them from those of you from up north before you came down here? Potholes, right? So what did they do? The white clunky tiles filled in where they removed the images so that the floor level would be level. Is that redundant, Smitty? Okay, it's redundant. But in other words, you're not stepping or stubbing your toe where they chiseled out tiles, but it left these white, clunky, ugly tiles filling in the floor. Let's see what kind of detail we've got here. Okay, now we're getting closer. Nearly 60 images, and the vast majority of them inside these medallions were removed. And if this was sometime during Yazid II or Leo II and III, so be it. But found in the debris above the church were Arabic-style oil lamps. The footprint is roughly the same as the Byzantine one, but it is more geometric and more plain in its decoration, so it wouldn't be offensive spiritually. But they didn't do a tremendously great job of totally removing the images, and we get these wonderful little hints. For example, here you can see a bear. Oh, okay. We'll let Mickey think it's a bear. That's okay. All right. But here you can see how whatever animal image was there was chiseled out. But these white clunky tiles filled it in. But you still see the outline. Do you follow me? Or let's go in a little more detail. This one is really great because there are two medallions that are linked together. To the rear is a big clunky shape of an animal, and you can barely make out the remnants of a gray foot. And what animal has a gray foot? An elephant. We believe that an elephant was in this medallion, but it was being led by a man, and here is the tether, but they didn't chisel out the entire man. His hand is here, still holding the tether. The other hand is here, and they left his feet. And by the way, you can get that style of sandals in any shoe store in Jerusalem, even today. And if I would have worn my sandals, you would have seen what I was talking about. But that's fascinating. Here you can see then the relationship between the two. And there is the gray foot right down there. This is great stuff. It really is. Here then, okay, a man is chasing. Now, if this is a bear,
It's a bear.
a man is chasing the bear. The man is gone, but his lance, his spear, is still there. So I guess this is the before, the after, in terms of the hunt, right? Okay. All of these medallions then, and the grapevines, eventually would come together and then be joined together in the final medallion at the very top end of the entire scene that began with the amphora below. And this was a peacock. The peacock itself, the entire body was removed, but there you can see the tail of the peacock and the eyes in the peacock as well. Who said that the ancient world was boring when it came to animals? Certainly not this mosaic floor. This then is the partially cleared central basilica that was eventually entirely cleared. There you can see them working on the floor, doing the final cleaning, the two rows of columns then that supported the roof, and the stylobate, which was the platform that the columns and the bases sat on, the main entry and the threshold right here, the aisle, the tomb, and the northern aisle below. The municipality of Arad was very generous. They sent out to the site one of these big bucket cherry-picking booms that they used to change street light bulbs. And so we were able to take these aerial photographs above the church at the end of the final season. The semicircular apse was then flanked by these two pastaphoria, or service rooms. Inside were, again, small colonnettes, a couple of them made out of limestone, a couple of them made out, or the fragments of a marble chancel screen with beautifully raised iconography of wreaths and vines as well. And here then you can see in this 3D reconstruction, the chancel screen was about 3 feet high, separating the apse, which was 2 steps up, from the rest of the church. And then the different panels then, I sort of put this composite together to show you the circular medallion facing towards a rectangular cutout. And that rectangular cutout, we believe, is the location of where the altar table stood in the apse of this basilica. And you can see it now in the computer-generated 3D reconstruction that we did. Remember, we're all dazzled by 3D graphics today. This was back in 1995, 6 and 7 after the excavation. So these were pretty basic, but we're still proud of them. Here you can see then the mosaic field and the different medallions that then had imagery removed. But they didn't do it all entirely well, because over here, in one of those medallions, they forgot to take out the head and the beak of a bird. And you can still see it right there as well. Here clearly in the drawing, you can see the outline of what I think are 4 peacocks, 2 facing each other in front of the altar base and the central medallion. Here's the central medallion, and in the middle of it was an equal-sided Byzantine cross. I know that this sounds like it's something that's old hat now, but in the 1990s, taking a computer out into the field and a laptop is not something that many people did. The Zenith Corporation donated get this, a laptop that weighed 18 pounds. I mean, there you can see it right there. And it wasn't even in color. But we took it out, we generated our forms and our plans, and we were able to fill it out right on the site. The trouble was, those damn camels kept tripping over the extension cord. No. But we were entering stuff right on the spot, which was entirely brand new for the world of archaeology. Today they take out tablets with them, and they have it linked up with GPS and satellites, and it's amazing. Some of the small finds. The chancel screen stones. A fragment of the altar table with a 4-sided Byzantine cross on it. The octagonal colonnette base, the columns themselves. There you can see the Byzantine cross. Did any of you see Annie when it was here last year at Florida Studio Theater? Well, the reason I mention that is because this is President Roosevelt right here. He decided that he couldn't make a living in archaeology, so he became an actor, and he's done 1,500 Broadway and around the country shows of Annie, and he still can't make it as an actor. But anyway, that's Jeff Duncan. Some of the other objects also, the oil lamps, bronze pins, iron rods, some projectile points, the bottles. Here is a coin of Yazid II that you see there, some of the beads, etc., etc. We were able to use computer-generated graphics for the 1990s to then input all of our dimensions and measurements and then create 3-dimensional imagery of our church, both as excavated, that you see here, and then also as reconstructed and restored, complete to the roof and the clear stories that you see here. I mean, look how old that is. That's one of those big clunky CRTs, right? Yeah. So. But part of our work at Tel Kerioth was serving as an archaeological field school as well. We would take students and volunteers, and we would teach them every aspect of the archaeological process. I mean, yes, granted, for an hour or two, you may be schlepping buckets of dirt and sand and dumping them. But then another hour later, you may be working with our photographer. And another hour later, you may be working with our architect and draftsperson to draw and measure the finds that you've got. So you were trained in every aspect of archaeological research. And in addition, these field schools would take volunteers and students to a number of archaeological sites around the country on weekends to show how other sites correlate with yours. This is one of the motley crew back here in 1992. And the final day, and now you've got to promise me that what happens in this room stays in this room, because for 40 years of excavation, anyone who's returned with me has always kept their mouth shut. The final day of the excavation, we take a group photo. And this is the group in 1993 of my students. But I tell them, okay, we're going to take a second picture. And nobody who has returned has ever spilled the beans. But on the last day of the expedition, everybody gets well watered, shall we say. And look how nice and smiling faces are down here, because the water hasn't hit them yet. They don't have a clue what's coming. We've got it on video, and I'm thinking of sending into the funniest home videos, you know, but it could bring back bad memories for some people. As part of a project that was sanctioned by the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the director of the Antiquities Authority at that time, Amir Drori, would come to the site, visit it. We would explain to him what we had done. It's part and parcel of every excavation in Israel that the administration of the Antiquities Authority comes to see how you are progressing, to make sure that you're doing things in the proper fashion. Now, you can see the site. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We are 18 kilometers from town. Nobody in their right mind is going to build a house and move out there and be paid as a guard, if you follow what I'm saying. So because we needed $100,000, and if any of you have it lying around, to build a perimeter fence to protect the site. That was without personnel, though. We didn't have $100,000 because we were in the middle of nowhere, or as they say in Israel, Yehupitzville. So what we did, as I mentioned earlier, we put down a canvas tarp. Then we put 3 feet of sterile sand on top of the mosaic floor. And then we laid down a course of stones on top of that. If we were to ever go back to excavate the church, to restore it, preserve it, and should the government decide that it wants to build a fence and whatever, it would be an easy matter of coming in with a front loader. And these guys are really good. And he would come within a couple of inches of that tarpaulin. And then we could pull up the rest of the tarp and the floor would be in pristine condition. Every couple of years, my Israeli colleague goes out to the site and clears away a little corner and lifts it up to peek underneath and to make sure everything is okay. And it has been for almost 20 years or so. This then is the Byzantine Church at Tel Kerioth. It is one of the early Byzantine communities that we believe commemorated the memory of Yehuda, ish Kriyot, Judah, the man from Kriyot, dare I say, before he got a bad rap in the Synoptic Gospels. This community was a well-respected community that, as a Byzantine Christian community, was abandoned with the advent of the Arab occupation of the late 7th and 8th centuries. The community then continued to exist as an Arab village until the 10th century, when apparently it was abandoned, but we have no indication as to why. There are no signs of destruction, either from natural causes or from other human occupation. It simply is a site that appears to be abandoned and left. You run the risk of meeting God in the desert. And that's why 40 years worth of archaeology for me has been in the desert, the Negev of Israel, from Beersheba all the way to Masada on the shores of the Dead Sea. It is an extraordinarily fulfilling vocation. And for those of you who are all Timesifters, and for those of you who share this passion of archaeology, I hope that I've been able to translate the excitement of discovery in the field to those of you sitting out here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If there are any answers, you can be sure that I'll question them. Finally, before we get to the question, one thing that I've always wanted to do since I retired from, retired from teaching. What am I doing? No. The university setting, that is. Wait, I do that too at Ringling. Teaching, munchkins, the people who don't want to be here. You guys want to be here, and I congratulate you on that. My father said, when you stop learning, you're dead. The thing I wanted to do was to write archaeological mysteries rooted in my work and the what-ifs of the ancient world and implications, because you just need to discover one thing that might throw the entire perspective of what you thought historically was accurate. It might throw it entirely out the window because it would prove to be false. So I've written 2 of them based in the Middle East, 1 of them based in Cuba and Christopher Columbus. I think I know where he's buried. It's in the northeast corner of the Santa Clara Cemetery in Cuba. And I'm halfway through a book on Palmyra. So now we'll get to the questions. And I expect all of you to go with us, Smitty and me, to Egypt when we get everything worked out. Yes, we're here and then here.
All of these mosaics that were brought in and the building techniques, are there any ideas about how that may have occurred? I mean, because it wasn't, do they have to come a long distance to get all this material there?
The question has to do with the mosaic material found in the floor of the church. All of the stone is indigenous to the Negev. All of the stone could be found naturally within a 30-kilometer range. We're talking about 3 or 4 different variations of limestone, ranging from whites to beiges to grays. Stone that has iron oxide in it for the shades of red. Basalt came from a little farther afield to give you some blacks, closer to the Golan Heights, for example. But all of the colors that were found are native to the geographical region of Israel today. The artisans appeared to be local artisans, but again, nobody was signing their material, so we can't say for sure.
Were other churches like this excavated around the world that were similar to this, like in Europe or?
There are no Byzantine churches to be found in Central and Northern Europe proper, because the Byzantine world was the Orthodox Christian world which was the eastern side of the Roman Empire. Remember, the Roman Empire split. And as a result of that, you find scores of Byzantine-style churches with similar mosaic floor plans and patterning throughout Israel, Jordan, Turkey. One of the most famous that is a very close parallel to ours is found at a place called Lud, L-O-D, which is a small community adjacent to Ben Gurion Airport today in central Israel. And its mosaic floors were found about 3 years later than ours. The church itself was called Beit Loya, for example. But you find them also in the northern part of Egypt as well. In the Delta, a couple of examples with badly fragmented, but nevertheless, mosaics that have a similar type of pattern. So it is a commonality for the Eastern Church and the Eastern Empire between the 4th and the 8th centuries, 9th centuries of this era. Here, and then here, and then here. Yes?
Yeah, about these mosaics, it's really interesting that the original Byzantine mosaics were, the interesting thing is not that they were changed, because that happens all the time when you have someone superseding or taking over. The interesting thing is that it remained an Orthodox church and not a mosque. I think. And it obviously did, because you have that Greek inscription.
Right, Yazid the first, Yazid the second, and then, you'll never guess who the next guy was. No, the fourth. No. Yazid the third. All of them were the victors. Yet they felt that as long as any kind of iconography was not offensive to Islam, they opted for allowing the Christian community to coexist with them. Because after all, Jews and Christians were still called people of the book by the Muslims. And that means that they were a cut above the pagans, worshiping a multitude of gods and goddesses like within the Roman Empire prior to Constantine. Do you follow what I'm saying? So the church, many churches were allowed to exist where there were communities as long as they paid a tariff, let's call it extortion, or they were doing nothing that would offend their Arab overseers, their Arab overlords. Then there was,
One more thing to say.
okay,
And that's about those beads.
the beads.
Yeah. They probably were sewn onto some sort of shroud, some sort of cloth.
We are not certain about that. There were no fragments of cloth. Yes, there could have been a burial shroud. They could have been, but some of them, as far as I remember, were laid out in such a way that they appeared to be more of a necklace type
That could be true.
with whatever kind of catgut string long since disintegrated, but they simply remained in place when we excavated and cleared. But that's a good idea. Yes, here, and then we have over here.
More specific question to what was just asked. Are there any similarities between this church and the last Christian church in Petra? It was
There are architectural similarities. As far as I know and am familiar, at Petra, you don't have the kind of detailed mosaic floor that you find here or in other Syro-Palestinian Byzantine churches in the heartland of ancient Israel.
What information did you have that you knew that the basilica was there?
The information that we, well, again, in archaeology, whether you're down at Philippi Creek or, well, not under warm mineral springs because that's all wet, but any kind of overland archaeological research, the first thing that you do is a surface survey. And again, in archaeology, there's this unwritten rule that everything ancient worms its way to the surface, and modern stuff falls somewhere, somehow, into the ground. Like with all of the hurricane that we just had. You notice how some of these big trees with their root systems and root balls have just ripped out of the ground because of the winds, which means that there's a big hole in the ground once they get rid of the fallen tree. Well, if there's any kind of workman who is there, and he gets hot and sweaty, and he grabs his handkerchief and he wipes his brow, but meanwhile, a penny falls into the pit where the tree trunk was, it's going to be 3 feet down. They're going to fill in the hole where the tree trunk was, but then where the tree trunk wasn't and the ground is undisturbed, you might find a coin that dates to 1850 at the same level, but just a foot over. Do you follow me? So that means that an ancient coin from that tree root system, when it got pulled out of the ground, could have been deposited on the surface. The ceramic material, the roof tile material that we came up with on the surface gave us a date of somewhere between the 4th and the 8th century of this era.
Yeah, but the spot was so deserted, I mean, to zero in on that.
Okay, I see what you mean. Israel was created in 1948, and one of the first things that the Israeli government did was have the Geological Survey work with its archaeologists, and nearly every single square foot of the country today has been part of a surface survey. And as a result, there were indications that there was a community because people saw these ancient caves and they saw the cisterns on the ground. We were contracted in the mid-1980s to go out and to deeply survey, surface survey this area, and that's where we came up with the stuff. David?
Do you know where the church was in relation to the rest of the town? Like, is it in the middle of town or the outskirts of town?
This is going to be a weird word because there is no Acropolis, but it was on the Acropolis. Acropolis is merely the highest part of a city. And this church was built on the highest level of the valley area. It was on the northwest side of what eventually we surveyed as the whole community, but it was the highest point given where the rest of the houses and those cave houses were located. So it wasn't in the center of town because that would not have been a high place, but it was on the highest point of town.
That cut you off. They're going to kick us out. The guards are going to come.
We've got 12 seconds.
Thank you.